courtroom froze as a little girl's trembling hand signaled her scarred German shepherd, unleashing a growl so savage it shattered the silence. Why did this therapy dog turn feral in front of a smirking stranger? Tears streaked her mother's face as the judge slammed his gavel, voice cracking with shock. Stop everything. What dark secret could a child and her dog unravel that no one saw coming? Subscribe now and help us hit 1,000 subscribers to uncover more jaw-dropping stories like this. The courtroom in the sleepy town of Willow Creek, Oregon, was a place where time seemed to stand still. Old oak paneling lined the walls, and the air carried the faint scent of polished wood and dusty law books. On this crisp October morning, however, the usual hum of routine proceedings was replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. Every eye in the room, jurors, reporters, and onlookers, was fixed on the tiny figure stepping through the double door. 5-year-old Ava Harper clutched the leash of Rex, a German shepherd whose scarred body told a story of battles fought and survived. Her blonde curls bounced slightly with each hesitant step, but her wide blue eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking, as if locked in a world no one else could see. Across the room, at the defense table, sat Victor Grayson, a man whose polished exterior, crisp suit, neatly combed hair, and wire-rimmed glasses belied the darkness he was accused of harboring. His lips curled into a smirk as Ava approached, a subtle twist of confidence that suggested he believed this trial was already won. After all, how could a traumatized child who hadn't spoken in weeks pose any threat to him? His attorney, Thomas Reed, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, mirroring his client's arrogance. The prosecution had staked their case on Ava's testimony, but without her voice, what could she possibly say? Ava reached the witness stand, a child-sized chair dwarfed by the towering bench where Judge Henry Sullivan presided. The judge, a stern man in his late 60s with a shock of silver hair and a perpetual frown etched into his weathered face, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. His gaze softened for a moment as it landed on Ava, a flicker of something personal breaking through his judicial mask. Few knew that Sullivan carried his own scars. His younger sister had vanished decades ago, a cold case that still haunted him. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but firm. "Ms. Harper, please take your seat. We'll proceed gently." Ava climbed into the chair, her small hands trembling as she gripped Rex's leash tighter. The German shepherd sat obediently at her side, his posture rigid, his amber eyes scanning the room with a precision that hinted at his past life, one far removed from the calm therapy dog he was supposed to be. The gallery whispered among themselves. Some jurors smiled faintly at the sight of the little girl and her loyal companion, while others shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to make of a dog in a courtroom. Rex's presence had already sparked heated debate before the trial began, with the defense arguing he was a distraction, a ploy to sway the jury's emotions. Then it happened. Ava's tiny fingers, barely visible beneath the oversized sleeves of her sweater, moved in a subtle, shaky gesture, a signal so slight it might have gone unnoticed by anyone not paying close attention. But Rex noticed. Instantly, the dog's body coiled like a spring, his ears shot forward, and a ferocious growl tore through the silence, deep and guttural, reverberating off the walls. His lips peeled back, revealing sharp teeth, and his eyes locked onto Victor Grayson with an intensity that sent a chill down every spine in the room. Grayson's smirk faltered for a split second, his hand twitching on the table as if fighting an urge to recoil. Thomas Reed bolted upright, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Jurors gasped, reporters scribbled furiously, and a woman in the gallery let out a stifled scream. Laura Pierce, the lead prosecutor, shot to her feet, her navy blazer creasing as she pointed toward Rex. "Your Honor, the dog's reacting to something specific," she shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. Thomas Reed countered immediately, his tone sharp and indignant. "This is outrageous. That animal's a menace. It's intimidating my client." The gallery buzzed louder, a cacophony of shock and speculation. Judge Sullivan froze, his hand hovering over the gavel, his eyes darting between Ava, Rex, and Grayson. For a man known for his unshakable composure, the hesitation was jarring. Then, with a force that seemed to shake the very foundation of the courthouse, he slammed the gavel down, the crack echoing like thunder. "Enough," he bellowed, his voice raw with an urgency that silenced the room in an instant. "This court will stop right now." He pointed a trembling finger at the bailiff. "Clear the jurors. We're taking a recess. 15 minutes. I want answers." As the jurors filed out, their faces a mix of confusion and curiosity. Ava remained still, her hand now resting on Rex's fur. The dog's growl had subsided into a low, steady rumble, but his gaze never left Grayson, who sat rigid, his confident facade cracking under the weight of that unyielding stare. Claire Harper, Ava's mother, rushed from the gallery to her daughter's side, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Ava, honey, are you okay?" she whispered, kneeling beside the stand. Ava didn't respond, but her fingers tightened in Rex's fur, a silent plea for protection. In the chaos, few noticed the way Judge Sullivan's hands shook as he removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes as if trying to erase a memory. Laura Pierce exchanged a quick glance with Ellen Carter, the animal therapist who trained Rex, seated near the prosecution table. Ellen nodded slightly, her expression grim. She knew that growl wasn't random. Rex, with his years of canine training and uncanny ability to sense distress, had just ignited a firestorm. Outside the courtroom, as the recess began, reporters swarmed the hallway, their voices overlapping. "Did you see that dog? It went straight for Grayson," one shouted. "What's a therapy animal doing acting like that?" another demanded. The public's fascination was palpable. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a mystery unfolding in real time. Back inside, as the clock ticked down the 15-minute recess, the question hung heavy in the air. What had Rex seen in Victor Grayson that no one else had? Was this a fluke, a trained response gone wrong? Or the first crack in a facade hiding something far darker? One thing was certain. Ava and Rex had just turned this quiet Oregon courtroom into the epicenter of a storm, and the truth, whatever it was clawing its way to the surface. "Hey everyone," the narrator's voice cut in as the scene faded. "What do you think just happened? Is Rex a hero or a liability? Should a therapy dog be growling like that in court? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm dying to hear what you think. And stick around, because this story's about to get wild." The screen fades in from the chaos of the courtroom, the echo of Judge Sullivan's gavel still lingering as the narrator's voice takes over. That was just the beginning, folks. But to understand why Ava and Rex turned that courtroom upside down, we need to rewind a little, back to the girl she used to be, the dog who almost didn't make it, and the shadow that's been lurking in the background. In a modest Portland suburb just 3 months earlier, Ava Harper was a burst of light in her family's quiet world. Her blonde curls bounced as she darted through the backyard, her laughter ringing out like a melody over the hum of summer crickets. At 5 years old, she was the kind of kid who'd talk your ear off, telling stories about imaginary friends, asking why the sky was blue, or begging her mom, Claire Harper, for just one more bedtime story. Claire, a single mother who worked long shifts as a nurse, would often sit on the porch swing watching Ava chase fireflies, her heart swelling with pride. "She was my little sunshine," Claire later told a detective, her voice breaking, "until that day stole it all away." That day, August 17th, started like any other. Ava was in the backyard, a fenced-in patch of grass dotted with daisies, playing with a plastic tea set she'd dragged outside. Claire stepped inside to grab a glass of water, her phone buzzing with a text from work. She wasn't gone more than 2 minutes, but when she returned, the gate was ajar, and Ava was nowhere in sight. Panic seized her chest as she screamed her daughter's name, her voice raw and desperate. Then she heard it, a faint whimper from beyond the fence. She bolted outside just in time to see Ava stumble back into the yard, her dress torn, her eyes wide with terror. She hadn't spoken a word since. The trauma locked Ava's voice away, a condition the doctors called selective mutism. Night after night, Claire found her daughter thrashing in her sleep, silent screams trapped behind clenched teeth. Therapists tried everything, drawing, puppets, music, but Ava remained a ghost of herself, her once bright spirit buried under an unshakable fear. That's when Ellen Carter, a soft-spoken animal therapist with a reputation for miracles, stepped in. Ellen brought Ava to her sunlit office, where Rex waited. Rex wasn't your average therapy dog. His hulking frame and jagged scar, a pink, puckered line running from his shoulder to his flank, told a story of a different life. 3 years ago, he'd been a K-9 unit star, working alongside Officer Daniel Brooks in Seattle. Rex had a nose for trouble, sniffing out drugs and chasing down suspects with a relentless drive. But during a late-night pursuit in a rain-soaked alley, everything changed. A suspect, a man whose face Brooks never saw, slashed Rex with a switchblade, nearly gutting him before shoving him into a dumpster. The department, strapped for cash, couldn't cover his surgeries or rehab. They scheduled him for euthanasia, a cold, bureaucratic decision that Brooks fought tooth and nail to overturn. Ellen, who'd been tracking Rex's case, swooped in hours before the needle dropped, adopting him and spending months nursing him back to health. She didn't just heal Rex, she transformed him. Using his K-9 instincts, Ellen trained him to detect emotional distress, picking up on subtle cues like a racing heartbeat or shallow breaths. "He's a survivor," she'd say, stroking his fur. "He knows pain when he sees it." The first time Ava met him, she froze, her small body shrinking behind Claire's legs. For 20 agonizing minutes, no one moved. Then, without a word, Ava shuffled forward, her hand trembling as she reached for Rex's scar. She touched it, and the dam broke. She collapsed against him, sobbing into his fur, her voice a ragged whisper. "You got hurt like me." Ellen watched, tears in her own eyes, as Rex lowered his massive head, his warm breath steadying Ava's shaking frame. From that moment, they were inseparable. Across town, another figure loomed over this story, Victor Grayson, a computer engineer with a spotless resume and a smile that disarmed anyone who met him. To his neighbors in Willow Creek, he was the guy who fixed your Wi-Fi and waved politely at block parties. But beneath the surface, whispers had started to spread. Over the past 5 years, 4 children had vanished from small towns across the Pacific Northwest, each case chillingly similar. A friendly stranger, a promise of puppies, and then nothing. No bodies, no leads, just grief-stricken families left to wonder. Detective James Carter, no relation to Ellen, had been chasing these ghosts for years, his desk piled high with files that led nowhere. Grayson's name had never surfaced. Until Ava. The first crack in the case came unexpectedly, not from Ava, but from a skinny, nervous 13-year-old named Noah Bennett. 2 days after Ava's attack, Noah showed up at the Willow Creek police station, his hoodie pulled low over his eyes, his hands stuffed deep in his pockets. "I saw him," he muttered, his voice barely audible as he stood before Detective Carter. "The guy with the black SUV. He was near her house that morning." Carter leaned forward, his pen hovering over his notepad. "Who, Noah? Who'd you see?" Noah swallowed hard, his gaze darting to the floor. "The same guy who took Sophie." Sophie Bennett, Noah's older sister, had vanished 4 years earlier at a county fair in Salem. She was 12, with freckles across her nose and a love for cotton candy. Noah had been with her that day, trailing behind as she begged for one more ride on the Ferris wheel. He remembered a man, tall, polite, with a puppy on a leash, offering to take Sophie to see more dogs behind the tents. She never came back. Noah's story had been dismissed back then. He was just a kid and he'd run off to play arcade games instead of sticking with her. But now, with Ava's attack, he was adamant it was the same man. "He had those glasses," Noah said, his voice cracking, "and that smile, like he knew he'd get away with it." Carter scribbled furiously, but doubt gnawed at him. Noah wasn't exactly a model witness. He'd been caught shoplifting twice in the last year. and rumors swirled about him dabbling in petty drug deals with older teens. Was he telling the truth, or was this a bid for attention, or something worse? "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" Carter pressed. Noah's eyes filled with tears, his fists clenching, because no one believed me about Sophie. And I thought maybe she'd come back. As the screen fades to black, the narrator's voice returns, warm but urgent. "So, here's where it gets tricky, folks. Ava's locked in silence. Rex is her lifeline, and Noah's dropping a bombshell that could change everything, or derail it all. What do you think? Is Noah a hero stepping up, or a kid spinning lies? Should the cops have listened to him years ago? Hit the comments and let me know. I'm hooked, and I bet you are too." The screen flickers back to life, the narrator's voice cutting through the darkness with a tense edge. "Okay, folks, we've met Ava, Rex, and the shadow of Victor Grayson. Noah's just thrown us a curveball about his sister Sophie, but now it's time to dive into the moment that set this whole nightmare in motion. And a twist that's going to make your jaw drop." It was a warm afternoon on August 17th in Portland, the kind of day where the sun hung lazily in the sky and the air buzzed with the hum of lawnmowers and distant traffic. Ava Harper was in her backyard, her plastic tea set scattered across the grass as she poured imaginary lemonade for her stuffed bear, Mr. Whiskers. Claire Harper stood at the kitchen window, her nurse's scrub still wrinkled from a double shift, watching her daughter with a tired smile. She turned away for just a moment, 2 minutes tops, to grab her buzzing phone from the counter. A text from her supervisor flashed across the screen. "Can you cover tonight?" She sighed, typing a quick reply, when a scream shattered the stillness. Claire dropped the phone, the clatter lost beneath the sound of her own pounding heartbeat. She bolted to the back door, her eyes scanning the yard. The tea set lay abandoned. The gate swung wide open, and Ava was gone. "Ava!" Claire's voice cracked as she stumbled outside, her bare feet slipping on the dew-slick grass. Then she saw it. A black SUV parked crookedly at the curb, its engine still running. A man's silhouette loomed in the driver's seat, and Ava's tiny figure was struggling against his grip, her blonde curls bouncing as she kicked and twisted. Claire sprinted forward, her scream matching her daughter's, but she was too far, too late. That's when Margaret Evans stepped in. The 70-year-old widow lived next door, a frail woman with a sharp tongue and a sharper eye. She'd been pruning her roses, her hands gnarled around a pair of shears, when she heard Ava's cry. Without a second thought, she grabbed the folding chair from her patio, light aluminum, barely a weapon, and shuffled toward the street as fast as her bad hip would allow. "Let her go, you monster!" Margaret shouted, her voice trembling but fierce. She swung the chair with all her might, smashing it into the SUV's passenger window. The glass shattered in a jagged spray, and Ava tumbled free, landing hard on the pavement as the man swore under his breath. The SUV's tires screeched as it peeled away, leaving black skid marks on the quiet suburban street. Claire reached Ava a heartbeat later, pulling her daughter into her arms as sobs racked them both. Margaret dropped the chair, her hands shaking as she sank to her knees beside them. "I got you, sweetie," she rasped, brushing Ava's hair from her tear-streaked face. "You're safe now." But Ava didn't answer. She buried her face in Claire's shoulder, her small body trembling, and went silent. A silence that would stretch into weeks. Detective James Carter arrived within the hour, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the scene. Margaret, still clutching her shears like a lifeline, recounted every detail: the man's clean-shaven face, his wire-rimmed glasses, the way he'd flinched when the glass broke. Claire handed over Ava's torn dress, her hands shaking as she whispered, "She hasn't said a word since." Carter nodded, his jaw tight. He'd seen this before, too many times. The partial license plate Margaret memorized, Orcs 4, gave him something to work with, and traffic cams soon traced the SUV to Victor Grayson, a man with no record, a steady job, and a house full of secrets. The search warrant executed that night turned Grayson's tidy Willow Creek home upside down. At first, it seemed spotless. Too spotless. No toys, no pets, nothing out of place. But then a forensic tech found it. Strands of dog hair from multiple breeds scattered in the garage, despite Grayson owning no animals. Digging deeper, they recovered a deleted photo from his external hard drive, a blurry snapshot of Ava at a family picnic 2 years earlier. Her smile bright as she held a popsicle. Claire stared at the image when Carter showed it to her, her voice barely audible. "That was my cousin's barbecue. He was there? How did I not see him?" The realization hit like a punch. Grayson hadn't picked Ava at random. He'd been watching her for years. The case could have stalled there. Circumstantial evidence, a traumatized witness who couldn't speak. But then the second escalation hit. 2 days after Grayson's arrest, Detective Carter received a grainy security tape from a park 10 miles away, time-stamped the morning of Ava's attack. The footage was shaky, the camera half-blocked by a tree, but it showed Grayson standing near a playground, a small puppy on a leash at his side. He wasn't alone. A woman in a red coat stood beside him, her face obscured by a hood, her posture stiff as she handed him something. A leash? A phone? It was impossible to tell. The puppy yipped, and Grayson glanced around before they both vanished into the crowd. Carter froze the frame, his gut twisting. He called Noah Bennett back to the station, showing him the tape. Noah's eyes widened, his breath hitching as he pointed at the screen. "That's her, the puppy. He had the same one at the fair when Sophie disappeared." Carter pressed him, his voice low. "What about the woman, Noah? Ever seen her before?" Noah shook his head, but his hands clenched into fists. "She wasn't there that day. But if she's with him now," he trailed off, his voice breaking, "she's helping him." Laura Pierce, the prosecutor, reviewed the tape with Carter that night, her sharp mind racing. "He's not working alone," she said, tapping the screen. "This woman, she's the key." But Grayson's clamming up. During interrogation, he smirked and said, "She's more dangerous than me." "What the hell does that mean?" Carter rubbed his temples, exhaustion creeping in. "It means if she's still out there, we've got bigger problems. More kids could be at risk, right now." The screen fades as the narrator's voice returns, thick with urgency. "Wow, hold up. This just got real. Grayson's not a lone wolf, and that woman in red, she's a ghost we can't pin down. Margaret's a hero, Ava's a survivor, and Noah's tying this all together, but can we trust him? What do you think? Is the lady in red a victim or a villain? Should the cops be chasing her instead of Grayson? Drop your theories in the comments. I need to hear this." The screen flares back to life, the narrator's voice dripping with anticipation. "All right, folks, we've seen Ava's world shatter, Rex step up, and a mystery woman in red throw us for a loop. Now we're back in that Oregon courtroom where everything's about to explode. Because Ava and Rex, they're not just here to sit pretty. Buckle up." The Willow Creek Courthouse was packed to the rafters on the trial's opening day, the air thick with tension and the murmur of a restless gallery. Ava Harper sat in the witness box, her small frame dwarfed by the oak stand, her blonde curls tucked behind her ears. Rex rested at her feet, his scarred body a silent sentinel, his amber eyes flicking between Ava and the man across the room. Victor Grayson. Grayson leaned back in his chair, his wire-rimmed glasses glinting under the fluorescent lights, that same infuriating smirk playing on his lips. His attorney, Thomas Reed, a wiry man with a reputation for shredding witnesses, paced before the bench, ready to pounce. Judge Henry Sullivan banged his gavel once, silencing the room. "Let's proceed," he said, his voice steady but laced with an edge no one could quite place. "Ms. Pierce, your witness." Laura Pierce, the prosecutor, rose smoothly, her tailored blazer a stark contrast to Reed's rumpled suit. She approached Ava with deliberate care, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. "Ava, honey," she began, her tone gentle, "can you show us who you saw that day in your yard?" Ava's hand tightened on Rex's leash, her gaze dropping to the dog's fur. 10 seconds passed. 20. The room held its breath. Then, with a trembling finger, Ava pointed straight at Grayson. A murmur rippled through the gallery, but Laura pressed on. "Let the record show the witness has identified the defendant." Thomas Reed shot up, his voice sharp. "Objection, Your Honor! This is a farce!" "A 5-year-old pointing at my client proves nothing. She's been coached, shown his picture a dozen times." Laura fired back. "Defense counsel's testifying, not questioning." Sullivan's gavel cracked again. "Sustained. Mr. Reed, stick to questions." Reed approached Ava, his strides long and aggressive, though he kept the mandated distance. "Ava, did your mom tell you to point at Mr. Grayson today?" Ava shook her head, her curls swaying. "Did the police show you his picture and say he's a bad guy?" Another shake, firmer this time, her hand gripping Rex's fur tighter. Reed smirked, sensing an opening. "Do you know what a lie is, Ava? What happens if you tell one?" It was a trap. If she answered aloud, he'd twist her words. If she didn't, he'd claim she wasn't competent. Ava's breathing quickened, her eyes darting around the room in panic. Before anyone could react, Rex moved. The German Shepherd shifted, placing his massive head in Ava's lap, his steady gaze locking with hers. Her breathing slowed, her shoulders easing as she buried her fingers deeper into his fur. Reed's face reddened. "Your Honor, this dog's interfering with my cross-examination. It's a blatant emotional ploy." Sullivan frowned, his fingers tapping the bench. "The animal's here to support the witness, Mr. Reed. It's doing its job. Continue, but watch your tone." Reed pressed Ava for 20 more minutes, firing yes or no questions designed to confuse her, but she held firm, nodding or shaking her head, her trust in Rex unwavering. Grayson's smirk faded, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. As Reed sat down, frustrated, a new figure entered the courtroom, Noah Bennett, the lanky 13-year-old with haunted eyes. Laura called him to the stand and the gallery buzzed. "Noah, tell us what you saw," she said softly. Noah swallowed hard, his voice trembling. 4 years ago, at the fair, a man with glasses. He had a puppy. He told Sophie he'd show her more dogs. She pushed me away when he grabbed her, said, "Run, Noah, I didn't save her." His voice broke, tears streaming down his face. "I saw him again, near Ava's house that morning." Rex let out a piercing howl, a sound so raw it sent shivers through the room. Grayson flinched, his composure cracking as Noah pointed at him. "That's him." The courtroom dissolved into chaos again, but what came next was pure pandemonium. Ava, still in the witness box, began scribbling frantically on a pad Ellen Carter had given her. She thrust the paper at Laura, a crude drawing of a woman in a red coat, a puppy at her side with the words scrawled in shaky crayon. She said, "I'm her sister." Laura's eyes widened. "Your Honor, this matches the woman from the park footage." She turned to the evidence table, where Rex suddenly lunged, his paw slamming down on a small leather collar tagged as evidence from Grayson's home. Engraved on it, Grace. Sullivan's gavel pounded, but Laura's voice rose above it. "Your Honor, this collar, it's linked to Grace Miller, missing 10 years. Rex is alerting." Grayson's attorney leapt up. "This is absurd. Taking cues from a dog?" But Daniel Brooks, Rex's old canine handler, stood from the gallery. "That's a trained alert, Your Honor. He's signaling something critical." Sullivan's face paled. He knew that name. Grace Miller was his sister's best friend, lost the same year she vanished. Laura faced Grayson, her voice steeled. "Where's Grace, Victor?" He leaned back, a cold smile spreading. "You've got 12 hours. She's in a bunker near Crater Lake, half a mile off the Old Mill Road. No food left." The courtroom erupted, jurors gasping, Claire sobbing in the gallery. Sullivan barked orders, recessing the trial as police scrambled. Helicopters roared to life within minutes, racing against the clock. 3 hours later, they found her. Grace Miller, now 15, lay in a concrete cell beneath a crumbling shed, her body frail, her pulse a faint whisper. Medics worked frantically, oxygen masks hissing as they stabilized her. In the chopper, Grace's eyes fluttered open, her voice a rasp. "I heard barking. I knew someone was coming." Back in the courthouse, Ava watched the news on a TV in a quiet room, Rex at her side. When Grace's face flashed on screen, Ava smiled, a real, fragile smile, and whispered, "Rex found her." The narrator's voice cuts in, breathless. "Holy, did you see that? 12 hours to live and Rex nails it. But that drawing, Ava's sister? What's Grayson hiding? Is the woman in red still out there? Tell me in the comments, who's the real monster here? And who's the hero? Ava, Rex, or Noah?" I'm shook. The screen fades in slowly, the frantic energy of the courtroom replaced by a quieter, heavier stillness. The narrator's voice softens, carrying a mix of awe and reflection. "Wow, folks, we just raced through a storm. Ava's courage, Rex's instincts, and a rescue that had us all holding our breath. But what happens after the dust settles? Stick with me, because this ending's got heartbreak, hope, and a question that'll keep you talking." The Willow Creek Courthouse stood silent the day after Grace Miller's rescue, its halls emptied of reporters and onlookers. Inside a small conference room, Laura Pierce sat with Grace, now wrapped in a hospital blanket, her frail hands clutching a cup of water. At 15, Grace was a shadow of the girl who'd vanished 10 years ago, her dark hair matted, her green eyes hollow, but alive. "She was my mom," Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. "The woman in the red coat. She brought me to him." Laura's pen froze mid-air, her breath catching. "Your mother? Julia Grayson?" Grace nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "She said it was my fault Dad left. She said Victor would fix me." The revelation hit like a bombshell. Julia Grayson, Victor's ex-wife, hadn't just been a bystander. She'd been a participant, warped by years of manipulation and resentment. Victor's confession came later that day, under the weight of Laura's relentless questioning. "Julia's the one who picked them," he said, his voice flat, his smirk gone. "She'd find the kids, lost ones, broken ones, and I'd keep them. She's still out there, you know. Good luck finding her." His words sent a chill through the prosecution team. Julia had vanished after Grace's abduction, her trail cold, leaving a gaping hole in the case. Was she a victim of Victor's control, or a predator in her own right? Meanwhile, Ava Harper sat in a quiet corner of the courthouse with Rex, her small hand tracing the scar on his flank. Claire Harper watched from a few feet away, tears streaming silently down her face as Ava whispered to the dog, words too soft to hear, but the first she'd spoken since the attack. Ellen Carter, Rex's trainer, knelt beside them, her voice gentle. "She's coming back to us, Claire." Rex gave her a voice again. Claire nodded, her sob catching in her throat. "She smiled yesterday, really smiled. I thought I'd lost that forever." Across town, at a juvenile detention center, Noah Bennett faced his own reckoning. Detective James Carter sat with him, a file open on the table. Noah's testimony had cracked the case wide open, but his past, shoplifting, petty theft, cast a shadow over his credibility. "I should have fought harder for Sophie," Noah said, his voice breaking as he stared at his hands. "She saved me and I let her go." Carter slid a folded paper across the table. A letter found in Victor's bunker, written in Sophie's shaky handwriting. "Noah, I'm proud you ran. Live for me." Noah's shoulders shook as he read it, collapsing into sobs as he clutched the page to his chest. Rex, brought in by Ellen for a therapy session, pressed his head against Noah's knee, a quiet comfort in the storm. The trial's final day came a week later, the courtroom packed once more. Victor Grayson stood before Judge Henry Sullivan, his tailored suit replaced by an orange jumpsuit, his defiance drained. Sullivan's voice was steel as he delivered the sentence. "For the kidnapping and murder of Sophie Bennett and 4 others and the abductions of Ava Harper and Grace Miller, you're sentenced to life without parole plus 50 years for the survivors. You'll never see daylight again." The gallery exhaled, a mix of relief and lingering sorrow. Claire hugged Ava tightly, Grace's foster parents wept quietly, and Noah stared at Victor, his fists clenched but his head high. But the story didn't end with Victor's chains. Grace's words about her mother gnawed at the investigators. Julia Grayson remained a ghost, her red coat spotted once on a blurry gas station camera 2 states away, then nothing. "She's the loose end," Laura told Carter over coffee, her eyes tired but fierce. "If she's still hunting, we've only won half the battle." The idea of Julia roaming free fueled sleepless nights for the families, a reminder that justice, while served, wasn't complete. Healing came in slow, fragile steps. A month later, Ava, Noah, and Grace met at a therapy ranch outside Portland, a sprawling green space dotted with horses and wildflowers. Ellen brought Rex, now officially retired, to Ava's care, his leash loose in her hand. The 3 kids sat in the grass, hesitant at first, then talking. About horses, about Rex, about the nightmares that still woke them. Grace, her voice stronger now, said, "I thought I'd be alone forever, but you found me." Noah nodded, his eyes red. "Sophie'd be glad we're here." Ava, clutching Rex's fur, smiled softly. "He says we're safe now." Their families watched from a distance, tears mixing with tentative hope. Claire started a foundation for missing kids, channeling her pain into purpose. Noah entered counseling, determined.